The hum of machinery echoed through the massive hangar as the Phoenix slowly came back to life. For years, the battleship had been abandoned, its systems powered down, its hull corroding in the dim light of the repair base. But now, engineers and military personnel swarmed over it, working feverishly to breathe new life into the warship. Captain Ariana Blake stood in the observation room, her arms crossed as she watched the crew below. The familiar sound of tools clanking against metal and the whir of machines were comforting, almost nostalgic. She had led the Phoenix once before, back when it was a formidable force, feared across the galaxy. But those days were long gone. She had thought the ship, along with her own career, was finished. Now, here she was, back at the helm, as humanity's last hope rested on the very ship that had once been a symbol of strength. Blake took a long breath, knowing the weight of responsibility that now lay on her shoulders. "Captain," came the voice of Admiral Richter, a stern man with decades of experience. He stepped into the observation room, his expression grim. "We're almost ready. The modifications are complete. But there's no telling how well the ship will perform with these new systems. This is uncharted territory." Blake turned to face him, her sharp eyes betraying no hint of doubt. "If it works, we'll have the edge we need. If it doesn't, we won't make it out alive." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them. "The Dark Zone doesn't forgive. We can't afford to fail." The Admiral nodded, his expression softening for a moment. "We've done everything we can. The phase cloak is operational. The reactor is pushing 25% more power than the original specs, and the railguns have been upgraded with phase-shifted rounds. We've never seen their like before. But you're right. This mission will be unlike anything we faced." Blake nodded curtly, then turned her attention back to the ship below. There was something poetic about it, almost like the Phoenix was rising from the ashes, reborn with new fire, ready to fight once again. She'd spent countless years training and commanding the Terran fleet, but this mission was unlike any other. The Dark Zone was a mystery, an impenetrable region of space where entire fleets had vanished without a trace. The enemy's presence there was unknown, but the human race had suffered too much already. If the Dark Zone was to remain a mystery, humanity would be its first casualty. The battle for humanity's future would start here, with a ship once considered obsolete now at the forefront of their greatest fight. "Captain, the crew is ready," came the voice of Lieutenant Sarah Kane, the ship's operations officer, over the comms. "All systems are go. We've got clearance to depart." Blake stood straighter, a sense of finality settling in. She had a mission, and the lives of everyone aboard the Phoenix depended on her decisions. There would be no turning back once they left the safety of the station. With one last glance at the ship, she made her way to the elevator that would take her down to the command deck. As the doors closed behind her, she whispered to herself, "For humanity." Captain Ariana Blake stood in the briefing room, her eyes scanning the faces of the crew members gathered before her. This was the moment she had been dreading. Leading a team of veterans was one thing, but this was a new kind of challenge. The Phoenix had been reassembled with untested technology, and the crew she commanded was a mix of seasoned warriors and fresh faces eager to prove themselves. Her task was to pull them together, to form something stronger than the sum of its parts. Behind her, the large holographic display flickered to life, showing the topography of the Dark Zone. In the corner of the map, glowing ominously, was the region they were about to enter. Unknown terrain, unknown enemies. The stakes couldn't be higher. "All right, everyone." Blake's voice was steady, but carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken worries. "This is it. We've been given one chance to make it through the Dark Zone, and we can't afford to fail." Her gaze swept across the room. Among the faces were old comrades, but also new recruits who didn't yet understand the danger of what they were about to face. She couldn't afford to let their youthful optimism cloud the reality of the mission. This wasn't going to be easy. "Zane Torres," she called out, her eyes locking onto a young officer standing near the back. Zane had earned a reputation for brilliance on the battlefield, but he was untested in deep space. He had made a name for himself through tactical simulations, often outthinking opponents in ways others found unexpected. But now, his cleverness would be tested against an unknown and possibly deadly force. Zane stood a little straighter, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Captain," he said, his voice sharp but confident. He had the makings of a true strategist, but Blake knew from experience that confidence could be a double-edged sword. "You'll be in charge of the ship's tactics," Blake said. "We're going to need someone who can think on their feet, someone who can adapt. It's going to be chaos out there. I need you to keep the crew focused and make decisions quickly. If you've got an idea, I expect you to share it immediately. No second guessing." Zane nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Understood, Captain." Next, Blake's eyes shifted to Lieutenant Sarah Kane, the ship's operations officer. Sarah had served with Blake for years, and though she was relatively young, her intellect and technical skills had earned her a spot on the mission. If there was anyone who could keep the Phoenix running amidst chaos, it was Sarah. "Sarah," Blake said, "you're handling the systems. The modifications are experimental, and we're going to need every one of them to function perfectly. There's no room for error. You're the one who's going to keep the ship intact." Sarah straightened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I'll make sure we're good to go, Captain. We won't lose a single system on my watch." Blake gave her a nod of approval before turning her gaze to the final member of the crew who had caught her attention. Sergeant Nikos Vallon, the ship's weapons officer, had a reputation for his calmness under pressure. His skill with the railguns and plasma turrets would be invaluable when they entered hostile space. His silent demeanor spoke volumes about his dedication, but Blake knew the real test would come when the situation became dire. "Nikos," Blake addressed him, her tone firm but respectful. "When it's time to fight, I expect you to take command of the ship's weapons. We need precision, no hesitation. If we're going to make it through this, your aim needs to be perfect. Can I count on you?" Without a moment's hesitation, Nikos met her gaze and nodded. "You have my word, Captain." No hesitation. Blake turned to face the rest of the crew, her eyes lingering on each individual. There were no guarantees they would all make it back alive, but they were united by the mission. The Phoenix had been rebuilt for one reason: to break through the dark zone, face the unknown, and survive. This crew, this ship, together, we're humanity's last hope, Blake said, her voice calm but resolute. "We leave in 1 hour. Be ready." As the crew dispersed, there was a sense of quiet determination in the air. They knew what lay ahead. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but for the first time in a long time, Blake saw something else in their eyes: a fire, a shared will to succeed. As the doors of the briefing room closed behind her, Blake took one last look at the map of the dark zone. There was no turning back now. The hum of the Phoenix's engines reverberated through the ship, a steady reminder of the journey they had just begun. Captain Blake stood at the command deck, eyes fixed on the large viewport that stretched before her. Beyond the reinforced glass, the black void of space seemed endless, a chasm of uncertainty. They were heading toward the dark zone, a place where time and space itself seemed to warp and shift. Even the brightest minds of humanity's military could only speculate about what lay beyond the boundary. No one had ever returned to tell the tale. Beside Blake, Zane Torres was already at work, scanning through the tactical systems, his fingers flying over the console. He had the look of someone who thrived under pressure, eager to prove himself, but also aware that this mission wasn't about glory, it was about survival. "Captain," Zane said, without looking up, "the phase cloak is holding steady. We should be undetectable to any conventional sensors for now, but I'm still seeing some erratic readings. It's like something out here is trying to reach out, almost like the dark zone itself is alive." Blake frowned, the unease in his voice not lost on her. She had heard reports of strange anomalies from other explorers who never made it back. But those reports were vague, filled with superstitions and rumors. This was real. They were about to find out if any of those stories had a grain of truth. "I don't care what we find out there, Zane," Blake replied, her tone sharp but reassuring. "Keep your head in the game. Focus on what we can control, keep us cloaked, and make sure our trajectory stays on course." A soft chime echoed in the background, signaling a new message from Lieutenant Sarah Kane, the ship's operations officer. "Captain," Sarah's voice crackled over the intercom. "We're seeing a strange energy build up near the perimeter of the dark zone. It's not like anything we've encountered before, almost like the very space is pulsating." Blake clenched her jaw, watching the vast emptiness ahead. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she couldn't. Humanity was depending on this mission. The Phoenix and its crew were their last hope. "Status on shields?" Blake asked, shifting her focus. "Shields are at full power, Captain," Sarah responded. "But if that energy wave intensifies, they may not hold. We're in uncharted territory here. I recommend we stay on our current course and keep the phase cloak active." Blake nodded. She could feel the weight of their situation pressing down on her chest. "Understood. Zane, maintain speed. Sarah, keep those shields online for as long as you can. Let's see how far we can push this ship." As the Phoenix neared the outer edge of the dark zone, a sudden shudder rippled through the ship. The sensors went haywire, flashing red warnings across the consoles. The space ahead of them seemed to warp, stretching in ways that defied logic. "Captain," Zane shouted, his eyes wide with alarm. "The phase cloak is starting to flicker. Something's interacting with it, something powerful." Blake's mind raced. They had known this could happen, but the reality was far more intense than any simulation. The dark zone wasn't just a patch of space. It was a living, breathing anomaly. The ship was fighting against something older, something unknown. Before she could issue a command, a series of massive energy pulses erupted from the dark zone ahead, tearing through space like a violent storm. It was like the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. The Phoenix lurched, its systems straining against the sudden onslaught. "Brace for impact," Blake shouted, as the crew was thrown forward by the ship's violent shake. "Shields at 60%. Sarah's voice rang out from the comms. "We're taking direct hits from the energy pulses. The phase cloak's gone." "We're exposed," Zane exclaimed. "They'll see us." Blake gritted her teeth. "Get us out of here, Zane. Now." With a quick swipe, Zane initiated evasive maneuvers, pulling the Phoenix into a hard roll, dodging another pulse that would have torn the ship in two. But the dark zone wasn't done yet. It was alive in ways they couldn't fully understand. For a moment, everything seemed still. The ship drifted through the chaotic energy storm, and Blake realized something. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to understand a force that defied every known law of physics, a force that might be as old as the galaxy itself. The dark boundary loomed closer, and with every pulse of energy, the mystery of the dark zone deepened. But they couldn't stop. Not now. "We're going in," Blake said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Full speed ahead, Zane. We're breaking through." The Phoenix trembled as it entered deeper into the dark zone, the ship's systems fighting against the constant distortions in space-time. The energy pulses had subsided, but the unsettling calm was worse than the storm. Every sensor aboard the ship was malfunctioning, giving them nothing but static and distorted readings. The feeling of isolation weighed heavily on the crew. "We're flying blind, Captain," Sarah's voice echoed in Blake's earpiece. "I'm doing everything I can to recalibrate the sensors, but whatever this place is, it's bending our instruments." Blake stood at the bridge, her jaw clenched in concentration. The crew was tense, and their silence spoke volumes. They had no idea what was lurking in the depths of the dark zone, but they had come too far to turn back now. "We push forward," Blake said, her voice firm. "Zane, maintain our course. We need to get as much intel as possible. Every second counts. Zane, visibly nervous, nodded, though his hands gripped the console tighter than usual. Understood, Captain. We'll push through. As they drifted deeper into the unknown, the space around them began to shift. The stars ahead appeared distorted, stretched and twisted, as though gravity itself was pulling them in unnatural directions. The ship's viewports flickered, showing flashes of strange, alien structures looming in the distance, massive monolithic structures that appeared to be made of materials that no human ship had ever encountered. They were ancient, weathered by time, but still standing, almost like silent sentinels. Captain, Zane's voice broke through the silence, a trace of awe in his tone. Do you see that? Blake stepped forward, peering out through the viewport. In the distance, a massive structure loomed, a dark fortress-like structure surrounded by smaller debris, remnants of ships long forgotten. It was like a graveyard, yet everything seemed too perfect, too symmetrical, to be random. There was a strange elegance to the ruins, but it held a terrible mystery. No human had ever been able to explore the dark zone before. There had been rumors, but this was something different. We're not alone here, Blake muttered, her voice tinged with disbelief. These aren't just abandoned structures. Someone, or something, made these. Before anyone could respond, the ship's sensors blared to life, snapping them back to reality. The holographic displays flared up, showing multiple unknown signatures converging on their location. Zane's eyes widened in realization. Captain, we've got company. The signatures are getting closer, and they're not human. He turned to Sarah. Lieutenant, are the shields holding? For now, Sarah replied. But with the way these unknown ships are moving, we might not last long if we don't take evasive action. Blake clenched her fists. The ship was barely holding up against the shifting nature of the dark zone, and now they had hostile forces closing in. There was no way they could outrun them. Not in this place. Prepare to engage, Blake ordered. We'll fight back if we have to, but our primary objective is intel. We need to learn more about who, or what, these ships are. Before she could finish, the first enemy ship appeared. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of the Phoenix. Its design was unlike anything the crew had seen. Its hull black and segmented, with pulsing lights that seemed to ripple across its surface like veins. Siron-class warship, Zane identified through the tactical display. It's one of them. Are you saying these are Exiron ships? Sarah asked, her voice full of disbelief. They'd never ventured this far from the edge of the dark zone before. What are they doing here? Blake's mind raced. The Exiron were a race that had been known for their brutal raids on human colonies along the outer rim, but they had always avoided the center of the galaxy. This sudden appearance, so far from their usual territories, was a puzzle, one that needed solving. They'd followed us into the dark zone, Blake said. But why? This doesn't make sense. Captain, they're powering up weapons, Zane warned, his voice sharp. They're not here to greet us. Blake's pulse quickened. There was no time to waste. She knew the Phoenix couldn't survive an all-out battle with a ship that large, not with the dark zone's strange anomalies working against them. The Phoenix was a fighter, but it was also humanity's only hope for survival. Take evasive maneuvers, Blake ordered. Get us in close. We're going to use the gravity wells to our advantage. If they want a fight, we'll give them one, but we'll do it on our terms. Zane hesitated for a fraction of a second before acting. The Phoenix lurched into motion, weaving between strange spatial distortions as the Exiron warship fired its first deadly salvo. The Phoenix dipped, dodging just in time, and Blake felt the briefest flicker of hope. There was still a chance. But the real battle was just beginning. The Phoenix shuddered violently as the Exiron warship unleashed another volley of energy blasts. The ship's hull groaned under the assault, the shields flickering dangerously as each hit struck home. Blake's grip on the console tightened as she watched the chaos unfold before her. every fiber of her being screamed for her to push the Phoenix harder, but the dark zone was still playing tricks on them. Space itself seemed to twist and bend, throwing off their calculations. Shields at 40%. Sarah's voice rang out from the comms, laced with urgency. If they keep hitting us like this, we won't last much longer. Keep them up for as long as you can. Blake snapped back, her mind racing. Zane, I need you to take us closer to that structure. Now, we need to use the gravity wells. Zane's hands moved instinctively over the controls, his eyes darting from one display to another. Aye, Captain. Trying to get us in range of the closest anomaly. Blake's mind was working at full speed, strategizing. They had to use the dark zone's gravity wells to their advantage. If they could maneuver around the Exiron warship, they could create a situation where the enemy's weapons would fire wildly, unable to adjust to the distortions in space. But it was a gamble, a dangerous one. The Phoenix had no real idea what would happen once they entered these chaotic zones, and the odds were stacked against them. The ship lurched again, this time from a near-miss blast. Zane's face turned pale as the proximity alarm screamed in his ear. Captain, they're locking onto us with their targeting systems. They're not messing around this time. Blake swore under her breath. They were closing in on the gravity well, but there was no time to waste. The enemy ship was relentless, and with every passing second, the Phoenix's shields were weakening. Evasive maneuvers, now. Blake barked, her voice cutting through the rising panic in the crew. Zane, keep us close to the anomaly. Zane's hands danced over the controls, sending the Phoenix into a series of tight loops and rolls. The ship creaked and groaned as it performed impossible maneuvers in an attempt to evade the deadly fire from the Exiron ship. The dark zone's chaotic nature was both their enemy and ally now. Space seemed to twist in impossible directions, throwing off the Exiron's targeting. But their enemy was relentless. Another pulse from the warship struck the Phoenix's rear engines, sending a shudder through the ship. Sparks flew from one of the main consoles, and the lights flickered ominously. Sarah's voice cut through the haze of urgency, sharp with disbelief. The phase cloak is malfunctioning. It's starting to. She was cut off by a loud crackle from the comms. The power surge in the system was enough to momentarily scramble their comms, but Blake didn't need to hear more. They were exposed. The Phoenix's only defense against being detected by additional enemies had failed. Get us inside that gravity well, Blake shouted, her voice colder than she felt. We don't have a choice anymore. The cloak's down, and we're running out of options. Zane's fingers flew over the console, slamming the throttle forward. The Phoenix groaned as it strained against the unpredictable gravitational forces of the dark zone, but they were on course now. The ship slipped closer to the massive gravitational anomaly, and the nearby Exiron warship was too slow to adjust, firing off another blast that missed by a wide margin. We're in, Zane announced triumphantly, though the tension still hung in the air. They can't track us now. We've destabilized their targeting systems with the gravity field. But Blake knew they weren't safe yet. They were in the eye of the storm, caught between the immense gravity wells and the deadly fire of the Exiron warship, with no clear path forward. The Phoenix had barely avoided being torn apart, and the enemy was not going to give up so easily. Captain, Sarah called out, her voice slightly trembling. The Exiron ship is moving into the gravity well. They're adapting to it. We need to keep moving, or they'll recalibrate. Blake's mind raced. They had gained a small advantage, but it wasn't enough. The Exiron warship was still a threat, and time was running out. They had to do something bold. Full power to the engines, Blake ordered. We're going to try to escape through that anomaly ahead. Zane, get us out of here now. As Zane pushed the engines to their limits, the Phoenix shot forward, slipping past the warship and straight into the maelstrom of energy and gravity. The space around them warped and rippled as the ship was dragged toward the anomaly's event horizon, a place where the very fabric of time and space twisted. They were heading into the unknown, but it was the only chance they had left. As the Phoenix plummeted into the anomaly, Blake's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a battle to break through the darkness, to uncover the truth about the Dark Zone, and to ensure that humanity had a future. The Phoenix plunged into the swirling maelstrom of the Dark Zone's gravity well, its hull vibrating violently as the ship was tugged and stretched by forces beyond comprehension. The lights flickered in the command deck, and the hum of the engines grew erratic as the ship was pulled into a turbulent pocket of space. Captain Blake gripped the armrests of her command chair, teeth clenched, eyes fixed on the monitors as the crew braced for impact. They were crossing into uncharted territory, an abyss where the laws of physics no longer seemed to apply. The HFY warship, just moments behind, followed them into the chaos, its engines flaring bright against the distorted backdrop of warped space. "Shields are fluctuating." Sarah's voice rang out, tight with concern. "We're approaching the core of the gravity well. If we don't adjust course, we'll be torn apart." Blake's mind raced. They had no real way to measure their distance from the heart of the anomaly. It was as if space itself was folding around them, distorting everything in their path. The Phoenix's sensors were useless. There was no way to tell if they were moving closer to safety or deeper into a dead zone. "We've got no choice," Blake muttered, her eyes narrowing in determination. "Zane, keep the engines at full power. Push us through." Zane nodded, his hands trembling over the controls, but his face remained focused. "Full throttle, Captain. We're on the edge of everything I know. If we don't get a clean break soon, this will be our tomb." The ship surged forward, deeper into the event horizon of the gravity well. The display screens blinked out, leaving only flickering lights and the growl of strained machinery. The air inside the ship became thick, the pressure building as the Phoenix was pulled in different directions. "We're being pulled in too fast," Zane yelled, his voice rising with alarm. "I can't counter it. I've lost control of the engines." The panic was palpable. The ship's systems were failing, and the Dark Zone was doing what it did best, disrupting everything in its path. Blake's heart pounded in her chest. They were running out of time. Every second they lingered in this space was one step closer to disaster. Blake stood, ignoring the disorienting pull of the gravity well. "Sarah, how much longer do we have before we reach critical mass?" "Not long," Sarah responded grimly, voice trembling. "The gravimetric pressure is increasing at an exponential rate. If we don't escape soon, we'll be caught in a space-time singularity. I'm calculating an exit point, but I need another minute." Blake's mind raced, her eyes darting from one crew member to the next. They were hanging on the edge of oblivion, and there was no telling if they could survive it. The HFY warship was just behind them, and with the Phoenix struggling, there was no guarantee they could escape before they became part of the anomaly's deadly pull. Suddenly, the ship's forward viewport flashed bright, a burst of white light blinding the crew momentarily. As their eyes adjusted, they saw it. Ahead of them, the very fabric of space seemed to break apart. A massive rift, a jagged tear in the universe itself, swirled before them like the maw of some great beast. Time seemed to slow as the hole in space expanded. "Is that a way out?" Zane whispered in disbelief. Blake's pulse quickened. The rift looked unstable, a potential escape, but also a deadly unknown. She didn't have the luxury of time to hesitate. If they didn't take the risk, they would be consumed by the gravity well. "There's no choice," Blake said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "Zane, aim for that rift. Full speed ahead." With the HFY warship still hot on their tail, Blake's heart raced as they hurtled toward the rift. The ship creaked and groaned under the strain, its systems near collapse. But as the rift grew larger on the view screen, Blake felt a strange pull, something almost magnetic drawing them in. It wasn't just gravity. It was as if the rift itself wanted them to come closer to enter. "Captain, we're not going to make it," Zane shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. The rift is unstable. If we don't hit it at the right angle. The Phoenix was on a collision course with the rift. The power of the gravity well, the tension, the uncertainty, everything had built up to this one impossible moment. If they missed, if they faltered, it would mean the end of everything. But if they succeeded, they might just escape the madness of the dark zone. Blake exhaled slowly, forcing herself to calm despite the pressure. Do it, Zane. We break through or we burn. There's no other way. With one final surge of power, the Phoenix shot forward, heading straight for the rift. The Phoenix surged forward, tearing through the space surrounding the rift. The massive tear in the fabric of the universe stretched wide before them, swirling with chaotic energy, its jagged edges pulsating as if alive. The ship shook violently, the hull creaking under the pressure of the gravitational forces trying to tear them apart. Blake's knuckles turned white from gripping the armrests of her seat, but she couldn't afford to look away. Braced for impact, Blake shouted over the shriek of alarms and the loud groan of metal straining against the immense forces around them. The crew tensed, their bodies pushed back by the sudden acceleration. The display panels flickered and glitched, the ship barely holding its course as they shot toward the rift. Angles not perfect. Zane's voice came in a panic. I can't compensate for the pull. It's too unstable. Blake's mind raced, the seconds stretching endlessly. They were hurtling toward something none of them understood, something that might lead to salvation, or worse, oblivion. The Exiron warship was still behind them, and if they didn't enter the rift in the right position, it would be their last mistake. The ship's emergency lights blinked red, and the loud hum of the engines shifted into a strained whine. Blake could feel the whole ship shaking violently beneath them, every system on the brink of failure. Steady, Zane. Just a little more. Blake barked, forcing calm into her voice despite the rising fear. We can't stop now. Zane's face was pale, sweat beading on his forehead as he desperately tried to keep the ship's trajectory on course. We're about to hit it. Hold on. The Phoenix blasted into the rift, the viewports before them flooding with blinding light. The ship was instantly engulfed in the rift's chaotic energy. For a brief, terrifying moment, it felt like they were disintegrating, stretched beyond recognition as the forces of the rift bent them in every direction. Time seemed to bend, and everything went still. Then, just as abruptly as it had begun, the chaos ceased. The ship fell into a strange calm. For the first time in what felt like forever, the Phoenix was no longer shaking. The loud whine of the engines and the hum of failing systems had disappeared. There was no turbulence, no violent pulls. For a moment, it was as if they were floating in a perfect vacuum. Blake opened her eyes, staring at the calm view screen ahead of her. The stars in the distance were distorted, almost as if they were paintings smeared across the black canvas of space. But the ship was still intact. The rift had thrown them somewhere beyond the dark zone. But they had made it. Are we through? Sarah's voice was shaky, a mixture of relief and disbelief. What just happened? Blake exhaled, though she could still feel her heart racing in her chest. I don't know. But we're alive. That's what matters. Zane was still glued to the controls, eyes darting across the readouts. His hands moved quickly, recalibrating the ship's systems. Captain, the rift. It did something to us. We've jumped somewhere, but I can't pinpoint exactly where. The instruments are all over the place. The unsettling feeling of being lost in time swept over Blake. They had crossed through a place beyond comprehension, and the unknowns ahead were just as dangerous as the Exiron warships behind them. Can we get any readings on that Exiron ship? Blake asked, trying to focus on the immediate threat. Zane's eyes flickered across the display. It's gone. They didn't follow us. We lost them in the rift. Blake let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For now, the immediate danger was over. The Phoenix had survived, but they were still in the heart of the unknown. They were no longer in the dark zone, but where were they? The rift had thrown them out into a completely different place, a place they had never seen before. "We're not out of danger yet," Blake said, her voice low but resolute. "We have no idea where we are, and we can't let our guard down. Zane, Sarah, start running diagnostics. I want to know everything we can about our location." "We'll need to recalibrate all systems," Zane responded. "We're in uncharted territory. Nothing here matches any known coordinates." Blake nodded, her mind already working. This was only the beginning. They had escaped the dark zone, but they were now lost in the vast, unknown reaches of space, far from any known civilization or even any hope of rescue. And whatever lay ahead, whatever secrets the rift had brought them to, could be as dangerous as anything they had faced so far. But they were alive. And for now, that was enough. The Phoenix floated in eerie silence, its systems slowly coming back online after the chaos of entering the rift. The crew sat in tense anticipation, each one processing the enormity of what had just occurred. They were no longer in the dark zone. The Exiron warship was gone, but now they were stranded in a place where nothing made sense. Blake paced across the bridge, her mind racing. There was a brief moment of relief when the threat from that Exiron fleet had dissipated, but that peace had quickly been replaced by an unsettling realization. They were lost. The ship had somehow jumped beyond any known space, somewhere in the vast and uncharted regions of the galaxy. "Captain," Zane's voice broke the silence. "I'm getting something on the long-range scanners, but it's odd." Blake's pulse quickened. She turned toward Zane, her eyes narrowing. "What do you mean by odd, Lieutenant?" Zane's fingers flew across the console, his brow furrowed as he tried to interpret the signals. "It's not a ship, Captain. At least not any ship we recognize. It's like a huge structure, and it's stationary. I can't find any signs of movement, but its energy signature is immense. It's massive." Sarah's voice came in low, but it was filled with a sense of urgency. "You're saying it's not a star or a planet. It's something artificial." Blake's instincts went into overdrive. She moved toward Zane's console, looking over his shoulder at the readout. The energy signature was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was powerful, far beyond anything the Phoenix was capable of emitting, and the fact that it was stationary in a place where no known structures existed made it even more unsettling. "We need to investigate," Blake said firmly. "We have no idea what we're dealing with, but it's the only lead we have. All systems at full power. Let's move closer, but stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." Zane nodded, and the Phoenix slowly changed course, creeping forward toward the unknown structure. The distance between them shrank, and as they got closer, the structure began to take shape. It was not a planet or an asteroid, but something far more complex. There were immense, geometric patterns in the energy readings, a design that felt deliberate, purposeful. The Phoenix neared the structure's outer edge, and Blake could see its shape through the viewport, a colossal, angular fortress-like construct, its surface covered with intricate patterns of unknown origins. The size was impossible to comprehend. It made the Phoenix look like a speck in comparison. "It looks ancient," Sarah murmured, leaning closer to the viewport. "Who could have built something like this?" Blake's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the threshold of something far older and far more dangerous than anything they had ever encountered. "Prepare for anything," Blake ordered. "Zane, run scans. Let's see if we can learn anything about its composition, its purpose." Zane's hands moved rapidly across the console, his eyes darting between the scanners and the readout. "There's nothing we can compare this to. The material doesn't match anything from our database. It's not like any known alloys." Sarah stepped forward, her face full of concern. "Are we sure it's safe to get any closer? What if it's a trap?" Blake paused, her gaze fixed on the looming structure. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. They had no choice. They had risked everything to survive the dark zone, and now they had found something that could hold the key to their future or their destruction. "We need answers," Blake said, her voice steely with resolve. "We don't know where we are, and we don't know who or what built this, but this is our only lead." As the Phoenix crept closer to the structure, the energy signatures grew stronger, more intense. The ship's lights flickered, and a low hum began to emanate from the hull. Something was resonating with the structure, something they couldn't understand. The very air inside the Phoenix seemed to hum with tension, as though they were being watched by forces far beyond their comprehension. The ship's sensors suddenly blared, a shrill warning echoing through the command deck. "Captain," Zane's voice cracked with urgency. "We've been locked onto. Something's activating on the structure." Blake's pulse quickened. "Is it a weapon?" I don't think so," Zane stammered, staring at the redouts. "The energy's not hostile. It's more like it's responding to us, almost as if it's aware of our presence." The air in the room grew even thicker, and for the briefest moment, Blake could feel the weight of history bearing down on them. They had entered the unknown. This was no longer just a fight for survival. They were standing at the edge of something far greater, and the questions swirling in Blake's mind were only multiplying. But there was no turning back now.